Hello everyone, have a nice day. Today we'll follow Jack and Tu Tien as a hospital visit becomes an emotional test of trust, fear, and love. Tu Tien tries to stay brave, but Jack can't ignore the signs, and one final conclusion from the doctor leaves him shaken. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Jack didn't breathe when the doctor said it. Not because the words were loud, because they were calm. Clinical. Final. The kind of calm that could hide a storm behind it. Tu Tien sat on the edge of the chair with her hands locked together, knuckles pale. She tried to look steady, tried to look like this was just another appointment. But Jack saw the tiny tremble in her fingers, the way she swallowed too hard, the way her eyes kept darting to the door as if she wanted to run. The doctor's gaze stayed on the screen. He scrolled once, twice. Then he looked up. "Your main test results are normal," he said. Tu Tien's shoulders loosened immediately, relief crashing through her like warm water. She almost smiled. Jack didn't, because the doctor didn't stop there. "But," the doctor added, voice measured, "I'm concerned about the pattern of your symptoms, and I need you to answer me honestly." Jack felt that single word, but struck like a hammer. Tu Tien nodded quickly. "Yes, doctor." The doctor leaned forward slightly. No anger in him, only precision. "You said the itching has lasted over a month. Worse in the early morning and at night. Worse in cold weather." "Yes," Tu Tien whispered. "And you've had recurrent nosebleeds." Tu Tien hesitated, just a fraction. "Yes, but not every day." Jack's eyes narrowed. That hesitation was tiny, but Jack's love had trained him to notice every crack where fear could hide. The doctor continued, "You visited a local clinic and took medication." "Yes." "And the nosebleeds decreased, but the itching persisted." "Yes." The doctor turned the screen slightly, showing a cluster of notes and lab values. "Your blood count is within normal limits. No anemia. Your liver and kidney functions are normal. That is good news." Tu Tien exhaled softly, like her body had been holding its breath for weeks. Jack still didn't exhale, because Jack knew something the numbers didn't say. Tu Tien was the kind of person who smiled even when she was in pain. The kind of person who would call a wound nothing if she thought it would keep him calm. And Jack couldn't afford to be calm if it was built on lies. The doctor reached for a pen. "Now, listen carefully. My conclusion is not that you are in danger today. My conclusion is that your condition is likely chronic and prone to recurrence. You will need treatment and you will need monitoring." Tu Tien's smile faltered. Jack's heart sank. Monitoring. It sounded like something that belonged to strangers and waiting rooms. It sounded like uncertainty. It sounded like a door that never fully closes. Tu Tien forced her voice to stay light. "So, it's just my constitution?" The doctor nodded once. "Yes, an allergic constitution can present like this. Urticaria hives can flare with cold or stress. Your face shows inflammation around hair follicles, consistent with folliculitis. I also see seborrheic dermatitis signs of dryness and scaling." Jack's gaze flicked to Tu Tien's face. He remembered the nights she turned away from him, hiding the redness, pretending she was just tired. "And the nosebleeds?" Jack asked, before Tu Tien could. The doctor didn't dismiss it. "We should not assume. Nosebleeds can be dryness, irritation, allergy, or local inflammation. I'm referring you to ENT for evaluation. Jack nodded, but his stomach twisted. Tu Tien lowered her eyes. Doctor, I'm fine, right? Jack felt anger flicker, not at Tu Tien, but at that word, fine. He hated it. Fine was the word people used when they were afraid to say the truth. The doctor looked at her steadily. You are stable. You are not in immediate danger, but you must follow the treatment plan exactly, and you must stop hiding symptoms. If you have worsening episodes, you return immediately. Jack's throat tightened so hard it hurt. Tu Tien glanced at Jack, a quiet plea in her eyes. Please don't make this bigger than it is. Jack couldn't give her that, because in Jack's world, bigger was the difference between catching something early and losing someone you loved to silence. Earlier that day, Jack had been at the construction site, walking beneath concrete beams with his uncle. The wind had been sharp, the ground still rough, the structure half finished. Jack had been listening to his uncle talk about foundations, about drainage, about refusing contracts that demanded shortcuts. People think stress is weakness, his uncle had said, stepping carefully over rebar. But stress is responsibility. One mistake can ruin lives. Jack had carried that sentence home like a weight. When he arrived, he found Tu Tien in the garden, tending vegetable beds as if she had all the time in the world. Her sleeves were pulled down, but Jack saw the faint scratch marks near her wrists. He pretended he didn't at first. He watched her water the seedlings, her breath visible in the cold air. "You're home," she said, with a smile, trying to sound normal. Jack placed a cup of warm water beside her. "Drink." Tu Tien blinked. "You bought me warm water?" "I thought of you," he replied simply. Then his gaze settled on her face. "You're going with me to the hospital." Tu Tien froze. "Jack." "No," he said gently, but firmly. "Not this time." She tried to laugh it off. "It's probably nothing." Jack crouched in front of her, eyes level with hers. "Then let a doctor tell us it's nothing." Tu Tien's smile wavered. And Jack understood, in that moment, the real enemy wasn't the disease. It was her habit of pretending. Back in the clinic now, the doctor handed them a printed prescription and pointed at a QR code on the paper. "This is your treatment plan," he said. "Some medication is covered by insurance. Some you will purchase outside. The hospital returns results via QR code." Jack took the paper as if it was fragile. Tu Tien reached for it too, but Jack's hand covered it unintentionally, protective, possessive, and afraid. Tu Tien noticed. Her eyes softened. "Jack." Jack looked at her like he wanted to apologize and demand the truth at the same time. The doctor's voice cut through the tension. "One more thing. When you go home, rest. Keep warm. Avoid smoke and dust. And if nosebleeds recur, do not delay." Jack nodded. "Yes, doctor." Tu Tien nodded too, but her lips pressed together in a line that said she was already planning to minimize it. As they stood to leave, Jack stopped at the doorway and looked back. "Doctor," he asked, voice tight, "if she says she's fine, should I believe her?" Tu Tien snapped her head toward him, shocked. The doctor's gaze shifted between them, understanding more than they'd said aloud. And for the first time that day, Tu Tien realized Jack wasn't only afraid of bad results. He was afraid of what she might still be hiding. And Jack couldn't tell which fear was worse. The doctor didn't answer Jack right away. He studied them the way doctors do when they've seen couples break under silence more than under illness. Then he spoke carefully, not as a clinician now, but as a witness. If she says she's fine, he said, believe her feelings, but don't ignore her symptoms. Tu Tien's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She reached for the prescription like it could shield her. Jack cut in softly, not harsh, but firm enough to stop her habit mid-sentence. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said. Just tell me the truth. The doctor pointed to the page again, bringing the moment back to something practical. This is the dosage schedule. Follow it. Don't skip. Don't double. If itching worsens or nosebleeds repeat, come back immediately. ENT will rule out local causes. Jack nodded, memorizing every word. Tu Tien nodded too, but her eyes kept dropping, as if the floor could swallow her guilt. Outside the clinic, the hallway was crowded again with footsteps, voices, carts rolling by. Life didn't pause for anyone's fear. But Jack and Tu Tien moved through it as if they were carrying something fragile between them. At the pharmacy counter, Jack handled everything. He asked questions. He repeated the instructions back to the staff. He checked the labels twice. When the staff explained that some medication needed to be bought outside, Jack didn't hesitate. We'll get it, he said. Tu Tien tugged his sleeve. Jack, it's okay. We don't need... Jack turned to her and lowered his voice so no one else could hear. We need whatever keeps you safe, he said. Don't bargain with me about this. The words weren't anger. They were fear, shaped into a boundary. Tu Tien fell quiet. While Jack paid, she stood behind him, staring at the clinic doors as if she could still hear the doctor saying the word monitoring. Her fingers hovered near her nose again, an unconscious check. No blood now, just a memory that had shaken her confidence. When Jack returned with the bag of medicine, she tried to smile. See? It's done. Jack didn't correct her. He didn't say, it's not done. He just took her hand and guided her toward the exit, like he was guiding her out of a storm. In the car, the sun was already dropping, turning the road gold and cold at the same time. Tu Tien leaned her head against the seat, eyelids heavy. Jack drove with both hands on the wheel. The medicine bag sat between them like a quiet promise and a quiet warning. After a long stretch of silence, Tu Tien whispered, "Do you think I'm hiding something?" Jack's grip tightened slightly. He didn't look at her right away, like he was choosing the truth carefully. "I think you hide pain," he said, "not secrets." Tu Tien swallowed. "Because I don't want to burden you." Jack's voice dropped. "You're not a burden. You're my life." Tu Tien's eyes filled. She turned her face away, ashamed of the tears. Jack reached over and wiped one away with his gentle thumb, like he was afraid she would apologize for crying too. "Promise me," he said quietly, "if you feel anything, even if it's small, you tell me first." Tu Tien nodded. "I promise." Jack exhaled, but it wasn't a relief. It was the kind of breath you take when you've decided you'll carry the weight no matter how heavy it gets. When they arrived at the farm, the yard light glowed warm. The bakery window was dark, but the faint scent of butter still lingered in the air. Home, but not the same. Not after hearing the words chronic, recurrence, monitoring. Jack helped Tu Tien out of the car. Before they went inside, he stopped her at the doorstep and pulled her into his arms, holding her longer than usual. "Tonight," he murmured against her hair, "you rest. I'll handle everything else." Tu Tien nodded into his chest, and for a moment, the world felt quiet in a way that didn't scare them. But as Jack looked over her shoulder into the dark yard, one thought stayed sharp in his mind. The doctor's conclusion wasn't what stunned him most. It was the possibility that Tu Tien had been suffering alone longer than she'd ever admit.
Hello everyone, in this episode, Jack takes Tu Tien to a major hospital after noticing her persistent itching and recurring nosebleeds. In a clinic, the doctor reviews her test and confirms her main results are normal, no anemia, and her liver and kidney function are safe for medication. However, the doctor's final conclusion unsettled Jack. Tu Tien's condition appears allergic and prone to recurrence, requiring strict treatment and monitoring. The doctor diagnosed wheals and follicles, no signs of several dementia, and refers Tu Tien to ENT to investigate the nosebleeds rather than assume. Jack's fear isn't only about bad news, it's the possibility that Tu Tien has been minimizing her pain and hitting symptoms to protect him. At the pharmacy, Jack insists on buying all medication, then bring her home.